someone have sent a copy of a newspaper, Greek newspaper, to my father. And because of that, he did get very worried and went to the hospital. He had a stroke. Thanks God, he's still living. Someone wrote a letter to my father-in-law and my mother-in-law that I was a crook and I was in jail. And they get upset. My father-in-law sent me a letter, which I still have in my hands, and he says to me that there's many other ways to live than to be a crook.
One of the few complaints about the publicity came from Patrick Lanigan, the Director General of Social Security, who objected to his department not receiving its rightful share of the praise.
30% of these people...
On the first weekend of the raids, he visited police headquarters. The police master list, which contained the names of some 1,000 Greek-born patients, was passed on to his department. Taking matters into their own hands, the department embarked on a course of action that was to have the most devastating consequences of all. Convinced by police claims that there was conclusive proof against these people, Social Security stopped payments to more than 700 Greek-born beneficiaries. This was a decision which, including their families, affected the lives of more than 2,000 people. Hardest hit was a group of 132 pensioners who had retired to Greece with their families under the pensions portability scheme. Having spent the best part of their lives in jobs that other Australians refused to do, these beneficiaries were now accused of ripping off the system in order to settle overseas, where they were supposedly living like kings. With only a limited extradition treaty with the government of Greece, Australian authorities could not prosecute the 132 pensioners living there, so they suspended their pension payments. In a move that paralleled the police interrogations in Sydney, Social Security called these beneficiaries into the Australian Embassy for what they were told would be a medical review. Dimitrios Spirou and his wife Fotini were typical of this group.
Was like court, not medical examination. Doctor asked him, when see him, "Oh, which one doctor give your pension?" "Dr. Tahmidzi," and he laughed. "How much money you give him?" We say, we didn't give him money. That doctor was a family doctor. So, not Dr. Tahmidzi give us a pension. Pension give us government doctors.
Some of the reports resulting from this so-called medical review were later described by a senior Australian government doctor as unprofessional and appalling. He even went so far as to comment that he wondered whether the examining doctor had been politically tampered with. At the time, however, Social Security was satisfied with these reports, and on this basis, 105 pensions in Greece were cancelled. Jim, where were you when your pension was cut?
That time, I was in the hospital.
What did it mean to have the pension cut that time?
That time we haven't got money to pay for the tablets for my husband, to go to the doctor, to pay foods for my children, for my husband, for me. It was very difficult.
While the court case was waiting to be heard, Inspector Thomas flew to Athens to seek the assistance of the Greek police.
Dimitrios Spirou received sickness benefits from the Australian government using false sickness benefit certificates.
His allegations of a conspiracy were accepted as conclusive proof by the Greek authorities. On this basis, they arrested and prosecuted 9 pensioners who Thomas claimed were key figures in the so-called kolpo.
2 men come, I say I'm detective police, and they take me, I say I bring you in the police station and put me for one very dark room and put me to sleep in there all night.
After I went to my house, wasn't house that time because we used to live under the big building, like gypsy, you know, put material, because we haven't got money to pay rent and everything.
On the basis of Inspector Thomas's allegations, Dimitrios Spiro was declared to be a dangerous criminal and incarcerated here at Koridalos prison, the most notorious maximum security penitentiary in Greece.
The policemen say, oh, that man is very crook man. He took from government, Australian government, $200,000 bring here. He is like Al Capone, you know? I say, my husband is not like this. My husband is very sick man. And you don't know, I know how he sick is.
Dimitriou was in jail for a month before being released on bail to face the charge of criminal fraud. As a condition of his release, he was forbidden to return to Australia, where he could have reapplied for his pension. These pensioners in Greece had to undergo 3 medical reviews before the government acknowledged that they'd been discriminated against and that they'd been entitled to their pensions at all times. They'd suffered extraordinary hardship for more than 4 years because of the prejudice against them. Meanwhile, in Sydney, all those beneficiaries whose payments had been stopped had to undergo an eligibility review. This was not conducted by doctors, but by officers of the Department of Social Security.
Well, they were conducted like something out of a police detective series, something like Starsky and Hutch. I remember one particular occasion, there was one officer who used to get up from behind his desk and pace the floor, and he'd be shooting questions right, left and centre at the 2 people he was interviewing at the time. He'd be going into their old bank books, their cancelled bank books, and say, 5 years ago, you withdrew $100. Why did you withdraw $100? And they had to name the reason why. That's just outrageous.
I have to report to the police for more than a year, I think, 2 or 3 times a week. Every time I was going to the police station, someone from our neighborhood was there and see me in the police station all the time. So it was terrible.
Nick Kaltsounis's case was a particularly sad case. His friends noticed that after his arrest, his condition deteriorated greatly. He did have a long history of mental illness, and the fact that he had to regularly report to the police and the publicity connected with this case caused him great anguish and distress, to the point that he committed suicide. His body was discovered at Earlwood Park, and the coroner's report indicated that he had swallowed a massive amount of DDT. His was the first suicide caused by the case.
Because of this whole case, I was so upset, and I was just, you know, I couldn't go over in my life, and I was determined to end my life. I did try to suicide myself with a Ramset gun, which a Ramset gun is a gun that they use it in the building site to drive nails and concrete and steel. And I did hit myself. I went to the polyclinic, they took the nail off from the right side here, but it was about ½ inch before they had.
The plight of the pensioners was compounded by the refusal of many doctors to see them after the arrests. Dr. Yola Lucia was one of the few who took up their case.
I became aware that there are a large number of Greek patients out there whose doctors had been arrested, who were possibly frightened of going back for medical treatment. And I made myself available to them. And as I saw more and more of them, I came to realize that their problems, which were big enough before they were arrested, were being made much worse by the persecution they were suffering.
Dr. Lucia's growing concerns led her to meet with the head of Social Security and the Minister, Senator Margaret Guilfoyle.
I made it very clear to the Minister and her staff that as an independent psychiatrist, I could see that these people were being made seriously ill as a result of the policies that were being enacted against them. I realized, sadly, that they weren't going to take any notice of me coming from the community. But fortunately, I found Senator Grimes, who understood immediately what it was about. Senator Grimes had been a doctor before he came into the Senate.